Some thoughts. Well, I say that, but this first section is a little bit negative as well as positive. We've been dealing with God. We've had a good look at what we can see about God and how others felt about Him, and some of the things that we still don't understand. But hopefully we've got a better picture, a bigger picture than we had before, as we come to terms with the reality that God is, and we worship Him, and He is all awesome. He's all powerful, and He is always on our side. He wants to get the best out of our life. But He does that not only by the creation that we enjoy, but He also has demonstrated His love for us in a deeper impact, and that is the impact of His Son, Jesus Christ. Jesus stepped into humanity, stepped into history. There's a lot of people today who, even in the religious world, who play down who Jesus is, who don't understand who Jesus is, and confuse the issue in many different aspects. There's some from just a purely nasty situation. They were trying to deliberately misinterpret some of the stuff that Jesus has done so that people can lose their faith. And there's other people who just don't know much about Jesus and really don't want to know much about Jesus, so to them it's irrelevant. But Jesus can make a difference. In His day, you either for Him or against Him. You wanted to lift Him up in praise, or you wanted to lift Him up on a cross. Very few people were able to stand by and just be indifferent to Jesus. In our day, because Christianity has been around for 2,000 years, and we've grown up in a technically Christian country, Christianity is taking a different aspect. People are used to the idea. They're used to Christmas. They're used to the baby staying in the manger. And they're not too happy about bringing Him out of the manger and sticking Him up on a cross. And even more misunderstand the resurrection. It impact their lives. So people like to keep Jesus in a nice little box. Bring Him out at Christmas and Easter, if you bring Him out at all. And that's about all really they want to know. They don't realise that God sent His Son to transform our lives, to change our lives, to help us to be more responsible, to help us to appreciate we can put our guilt behind us, put our sin behind us, and challenge us to be the best that we can be, and in our own small way make an impact in the world to the best of our ability. So Jesus can make a difference in our lives. The problem is if we want to or not. Unfortunately, God, in all His wisdom, has left the choice with us, and that's a bad choice, because how good are we at making good choices? How often do we make the wrong choices? But God tries to give us the evidence, and He wants, based upon that evidence, for us to see Jesus, and more than that, to fall in love with Jesus, because He cares about us. He wants to make a difference in our lives. Now, this lesson is going to take a slightly different aspect. We're going to look at what some of the people have said about Jesus, especially in the age we live in today. I was listening to a program, well, actually a bunch of programs from Oxford University, and yeah, all these fancy theologians, people, you know, we use the word theology, that's got God in the title, it's about God. And you think people who are theologians would be in the forefront of helping other people to see how great God is. And yet when you listen to some of the things I have to say, you realise half of them don't believe in God. Why they're theologians, I just don't understand. But that's the way it goes. And they're not very helpful, because they're in our universities, and they're teaching the people who go to university. There's an old story where I remember we've had a couple of members of the congregation times past to go to university, and the first 3 months, one of the things they try to do is actually destroy your belief in God. And if you still believe in God after 3 months, they say, you must be stupid, you know, because we're intelligent people. You know, we don't believe in God, therefore why on earth are you doing it? Still believing in God. And there was a Baptist minister from Corby who did an 18-month course at Oxford. And when he first started the course, there was 13 people as part of his course, and they all believed the Bible when they went to the course. There was a theology course. It was supposed to be about God and Christ, and he was the only one at the end of the 18 months who still believed in God and the Bible. Absolutely horrendous, okay? And so that's what we're up against. And some of the popular programs that we have, and some of the popular comedians that we have, take every opportunity to downgrade God. QI, every opportunity they get, they'll try and ridicule the idea of God, they try and ridicule the idea of creation, and to highlight the idea of evolution and all that type of stuff, and make you feel, or try and make you feel stupid. Even just about a couple of months ago, they were talking about the census that was taken when Jesus was born, and they said that census never existed. You know, that's rubbish, that is. Even though there's a lot of evidence that the census did take place, because Luke's pretty accurate, you know, you can pretty much trust Luke when he talks about stuff like that. But they are listening to some theologians who are supposed to be God believers and Bible believers, but who spend most of their time actually tearing the whole thing apart. In 1925 in this country, there were many young men went from the churches to even theology colleges, and there was a thing called German high criticism was in vogue at that time. And basically what they were doing is we're deconstructing the Bible, we're taking the Bible apart, and then with the idea of putting it back together again, you know, really looking at the fine detail and stuff. The problem with the German high criticism was they knew how to take it apart, but they couldn't figure out how to put it back together again. And so people were going to colleges and universities believing in God, and coming out of them the other end no longer believing in God, because that was the prevailing philosophy at the time. Thankfully, many of these guys are dead and gone, and most of the books have been confined to the bin where they should be, really, though you can still get them on the internet. You know, it's sad, but it had a huge impact in our schools, our colleges, our universities, and we still reel from that. It was interesting. Who saw the Horizon program on the Big Bang the other week? Oh, you missed a good one. You missed a good one. I mean, they still believe the Big Bang at the end, but they showed mathematically how really it's a faith. They didn't say that, obviously, but they showed that in the world of quantum physics, in the world of the mathematics, mathematicians deal with the universe and stuff like that. The Big Bang's got lots of problems in it, and the problems mean that they're thrown sometimes to say, well, the Big Bang didn't exist, or the Big Bang doesn't work. And then when they throw away a couple of other things, but it was all we're stuck with, so we're hanging in there, even though it's shot full of holes. But it was a good program, well put together. It was all good evolutionary scientists.
I heard on the radio that something came out that scientists no longer believe in the Big Bang.
Well, this is the problem. 9 times out of 10, the information we get now is already out of date. The scientists at the cutting edge of the field and physics and astronomy and stuff like that, by the time it comes to us, the popular stuff through the television and radio, it's usually about at least 10 years out of date. They've already moved on. Dawkins spent 40 years trying to figure out a philosophical problem to deal with the universe. And when he finally thought he cracked it, he came before a whole panel of his own people to say, look, I found it. You know, after 40 years, I finally found it. But when he talked to a bunch of the people who were in the room listening to his expose of his last 40 years of work, there was quite a number of them said, he's got that wrong somewhere. And they would then go off, and they actually did. He hadn't wasted his 40 years, because he had fun. But the answer he was looking for wasn't there. And that's why you see him now on TV, because really he's past his best. Mathematically he's past his best, and he's now more like a public figure, and he's basically just talking stuff that's no longer relevant. Thankfully, a lot of these physicists are quite thankful he's been downgraded, because he was a popular guy, and they thought he was only popular because he was handicapped. It was his handicap that made him stand out from the other physicists and scientists and mathematicians of his day, rather than his actual studies. And so some people rather resented him, because he was getting all this attention, all this media time, mainly because they thought, well, he is brilliant, and he's brilliant in a wheelchair. but they felt because he was in a wheelchair, he was getting far more exposure than a whole bunch of other guys working away in the laboratories on the same mathematical problems and not coming up with answers. So it's a difficult field. But yes, about a month or so ago, there was a bunch of scientists and a bunch of mathematical scientists in a university who said, we've been working on this for the last 50 years because the maths behind the Big Bang didn't make sense. And they thought, a month ago, they'd come up with an answer. Now that answer is still, is a good word for astronomy, it's nebulous. In other words, the answer they've come up with has actually produced more problems than they thought the answer they dealt with had. Okay? So it's a kind of floating stuff. They've got a whole bunch of different things. Anyway, the thing is, okay, we're in an age that's very sceptical of all things religious, even though evolution itself is a religion. But the people who believe in it don't believe it's a religion. They think they've got the facts. But it's actual fact that the facts that they've got don't add up. But they're stuck with it because they haven't got anything else. In fact, one of the scientists on that program said he doesn't think they're going to have answers for at least one more generation. He thinks maths is, in some areas, is so far behind as yet to come up with an answer. He can't see it. There's so many problems, he can't see it, he's been honest, in his generation. So here's a scientist saying what we are talking to everybody else about, what the universe began and how it began and all this type of stuff. He says, we don't believe in ourselves, but we're stuck with it, okay? And we'll keep working with it until something better comes up. Because whatever's better must be that much better. Because instead of giving answers, the more they understand about the universe, the more questions they come up with, and the more anomalies they find. So it's a problem. But that gives us a problem because the average people in the street, they're listening to all these people and saying, well, these people know what they're talking, they're scientists, aren't they?
And write books about it and all that as well. They write books and all that, and
that's right.
TV programs.
Oh yeah, they have debates. Matter of fact, I remember Brian Cox. Last year I did a program. The program was supposed to be how the universe came into existence. And I watched it, thinking I was looking for it. But he didn't answer the question. But in his statements, one of the statements said, we now know, you know. And that's a strong word to use for scientists, that's a strong word to use. And all his mates of it were watching the same thing and said, oh no, we don't. But it sounds good because he's the one promoting it. Him and Dara O'Brien. You know, they're good buddies. There's 3 comedians and him used to have done tours up and down Britain, promoting science, but at the same time putting a knife into religion into God as far as they can. O'Brien was an ex-Roman Catholic, and he's had his own problems with religion, and his answer to that is to be totally negative. So there's a whole bunch of that stuff, but it's people that people look up to. These are people who are on the box all the time, and people are saying, well, you know, they seem to know what they're talking about. He's a mathematician. You should know what he's talking about. But anyway, but the thing is, the people that we're talking to in the street, they don't believe in Jesus. Why? Because, well, Stephen Fry doesn't believe in Jesus. Why should I? Dara O'Brien doesn't believe in Jesus. Why should I? David Cox doesn't, Brian Cox doesn't believe in Jesus. You know, and these are clever men, so what do I know? They must be right. Anyway, that's the enemy we're up against. And so, you're going to see some of that as we go on. Let's see if we can get my mic's working. Are the skeptics right? Are they right to say Jesus is just a figment of our imagination? He never existed, okay? This guy, Bertrand Russell, he was a philosopher, a very good writer, a very powerful man in his day. The problem with some of these guys is, at different stages of their life, they deal with some stuff, and then they say, well, this is it. And then they say, no, it isn't anymore, and they move on. And he was of that type of thing, but he was very powerful in his day, and very well liked to listen to, an intellectual. And he said, historically, it is quite doubtful whether Christ ever existed at all. And if he did, we know nothing about him. So he's, you know, you can tell whose side he's on. Poor old guy. He knows better now, he's dead. This other guy, this is probably what, in our day and age, he's the main face of anti-religion. He's the main face of the anti-God people. He used to be religious, and then he, for some reason or other, he gave it up. Then he became, he's in all sorts of debates with all sorts of religious people to try and knock God down. That's why stuff like this comes out. Nobody knows who the four evangelists were. They most certainly never met Jesus personally. Much of what they wrote with no sense in an honest attempt at history. It was simply a rehash from the Old Testament, because the gospel makers were devoutly convinced that the life of Jesus must fulfill Old Testament prophecies. It's even possible to mount a serious case, though not widely supported, historical case, that Jesus never lived at all. As has been done by, among others, a guy called Professor G.A. Wells of the University of London in a number of books, including one, Did Jesus Really Exist? Okay? So he's saying, you know, there are scholars out there who totally deny that Jesus ever existed. I remember years ago, the Bishop of Durham. Wait, what's in the name? What gives you a clue in the name? Bishop of Durham, is he religious or non-religious? I would say religious, yeah? Well, he, in his books, he writes about the myth of Jesus. He doesn't believe in Jesus. No, he's a bishop. What's he doing in his job? I don't know. It just doesn't make sense. Anyway, but so there's that kind of problems, all right? And that's what we were up against. I mean, these are clever people. And they're well respected in their field. That's what they should be, in the field.
Yes.
Not really, sorry about that. Cut that out of the there's a film on the internet that's available on the internet called Zichist, the movie. The reality is Jesus was a solar deity of the Gnostic Christian sect. And like all other pagan gods, he was a mythical figure. It was the political establishment that sought to historize the Jesus figure for social control. Marx said something similar. Karl Marx said, religion is the opium of the people. It's just to keep people numb and under control by others. So therefore, you shouldn't believe in it. I know this is the same kind of thing. The political people wanted to keep the normal people under control, so they gave them this Jesus figure that would make them live in peace and harmony and stuff like that, and be nice, pacify them, turn the other cheek. That's great. If you go to war with a bunch of people who turn the other cheek, you'll definitely win, won't you? Anyway, so that was the idea behind it. Now, are the skeptics right? Was there no actual Jesus of Nazareth? Did he really live? Was Jesus just an invention, something that was pieced together from ancient pagan god myths? And that's the real question. Is there no historical evidence to validate the claims that Jesus actually existed? Can we really know that he actually existed? Is Jesus just a copy of pagan gods, or lots of other stuff? If you look at the story of the flood, then people say, the flood isn't really a biblical thing. They stole that idea from what they call the Gilgamesh epics, which predated the flood in mythology. There's a guy who wrote a book, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's got a list of about, I think about 56 different countries, and all of them in their oral tradition, because obviously not every country wrote stuff down, but a lot of countries have a strong oral tradition, and they all talk about a flood, a worldwide flood. They all talk about a boat involved, they all talk about a few people being saved. And these are people from all different nationalities and lots of different countries, have all got in their tradition somewhere. And this guy argued, or these people argue, that Jesus never really existed. He was just a myth like so many other. When you remember Paul in Acts chapter 17 when he's surrounded in Athens, and you've got all these gods, all these statues to all these gods around him, the Christians at that time were asked by the Romans, said, we don't mind you having a god, just you've got to take on our gods as well, because at that particular time the Roman emperor, even some of the, like Caligula and people like that, they would actually claim to be gods. And one of the problems they had was, on the part of the Roman staff, they would say, if you don't bow down and give some response to our God, our emperor, then you're going to die. That's That's why a lot of Christians ended up being killed, because they wouldn't bow down to what was basically an idea, a human being in the Roman Empire, the leader Roman Empire, who wanted to be called a god. They said, we've got our own God, we don't want yours. So they weren't. There's a word for mixing different religions together. It's called syncretism. And basically, the Roman argument was, do you Christians, we'll let you live, we'll let you worship your Jesus, or whoever you want to worship, as long as you worship our gods as well. And then when Paul in Athens, surrounded by all these deities, he says, here's what a statue to the unknown God. He says, see all these other ones that you've made with your hands. He said, I'll tell you about the one who is bigger than all them, the one true God, the unknown God you've got the statue to here. And he's not made with man's hands who can be carried around. He says he's the one that carries you. In him we live and move and have a very... I'm going to tell you about the one true God. And of course that went down like a lead balloon. But so lots of these people have the idea Jesus was just a god amongst many other gods. A myth, like many others. How many of these Greek gods are worshipped today? Even in Greece. You see the statues, you go around these big places, and you've got lots of... Here's Apollos. Here's all these others, but they no longer worship him because they were only pieces of stone. They recognised only pieces of stone. The guy called Bruno Bauer. Now this is one of the problems that religion had about the late 18th century into about 1930, 1940. These people were influential people, huge writers in religious circles. But look at some of the ideas that come up with. He was a German theologian, a philosopher, a historian. He looked at the source of the New Testament and controversially concluded that early Christianity owed no more to Greek philosophy than to Judaism. He says, there's not really much in it. In 1940 he began a series of controversial works arguing that Jesus was just a myth. A second century fusion of Jewish thought, Greek thought, Roman theology. And Buer's work was picked up by a guy called Kalfoff, 1850 to 1906. And he followed Buer's extreme skepticism. And he went even so far as to claim that Jesus, he never existed and was not the founder of Christianity. Christianity. So there's a whole bunch of people in the universities at this time who were denying who Christ was. And they were very vocal in doing it. And there was lots of people who were willing to take up the same idea. Bauer and Kalfoff came others, the most notable guy called James Fraser. He wrote a work entitled The Golden Bough. And he argued that Jesus pretended, he mimicked the supposed widespread worship of dying and rising fertility gods in various places. In Mesopotamia there was a god called Tammuz. In Syria there was a god called Adonis. In Asia Minor there was a god called Attis. And in Egypt there's a god called Osiris. He said Jesus is just like all these. He copied these others so that people would follow him and believe in him. And then this other young lady, she comes up. She was one of the ones who helped to produce this idea with the idea of spiritism and theosophy. And she was supposed to be an expert, and she claims that Jesus was just a mythological person. Now, one example of the copycat claims that they make about Jesus said, well, the god Horus in Egypt, he was just like Jesus. He did all the things that Jesus did. He was born the same way Jesus was born, a virgin birth and all that type of stuff. Jesus just copied him. Difficult to copy where you're born and who you're born to, but that's a different matter. Okay, but a whole list of stuff here is what they claim that Horus was like. And they say he was just like Jesus, or Jesus was just like him. And yet when you look closely at the history of Horus, there's absolutely very little comparison at all. How on earth they can say that Jesus copied the idea of Horus and made it his own, and his followers made him like this god? It just doesn't make sense. And I'm not going to go through them in detail, because it's all there. Eventually you'll get the notes or whatever. Horus was born in the wrong month. He wasn't born in spring. We recognise, not everybody recognises, December the 25th isn't Jesus' birthday. Okay, that's a man-made thing about 4 centuries later. But he wasn't born, probably wasn't born in the winter. The Bible itself never assigns a birthday to Christ. There's no record of the 3 kings who visit Horus at birth. Of course, kings didn't visit Jesus. Who visited? Wise men visited Jesus. They actually, if you understand where they were coming from in the Babylonian Empire area, they were having real political struggles. And what they wanted was, they wanted somebody that they could actually make a king and be able to control the Palestinian, Syrian area. And they were probably coming to check out Jesus to see king being born. We might be able to use him politically while he's still young. If we can get him under our wing while we're still young and bring him up where we live, he could become our puppet king. We'd be able to control him. And that was sometimes the idea. So they came because they knew somebody royal was being born, but they came for the reason to be a kingmaker, really. And that's why Herod didn't like him either, because he didn't like the idea of somebody being made king and throw it over his territory. No records of Horus being a teacher at the age of 12. He was never baptized. He was never... it was interesting one day. The only connection with Horus had with water is described in one way. He's been torn to pieces by a crocodile god, and the fish mountain water was placed into. He didn't have a ministry. He didn't have disciples. According to Horus, he had 4 semi-gods who were followers, and sometimes 16 human followers, and a number of blacksmiths who went into battle with him. There's no, and you look at the story of Horus, and you think, how on earth can they say that this is about Jesus? How can anybody say this is what Jesus is all about? It's absolutely crazy. Didn't die, blah, blah. He didn't have a death, burial, resurrection. Some of the accounts have Horus, Osiris, being brought back to life by Isis and going to be the lord of the underworld. The left eye of Horus was gouged out, which supposedly explains why the moon, which it represented, was so weak. So you see the sun, you see the moon, you're looking at the 2 eyes of Horus. One's been gouged out a bit, so it's a bit weaker than the other one. So you can, some god this is they're talking about. During new moon, Horus became blinded and all that. Anyway, it's interesting stuff, but it's just not worth looking at. It goes by saying that alleged parallels are discovered by pursuing such methodology, evaporate when they are confronted with the original text. He says you can talk about all these comparisons and likenesses if you like, but when you actually look at the true story and you look at Christ, there's no way it compares. Okay, basically that's what it said. But it's interesting. That's what people do. They throw up these, what we used to call them straw men. They throw up something and they think, oh, that sounds good. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. And as soon as you actually come to look at what they're throwing up, you realise, what's going on here? Trying to pull the wool over my eyes. Okay? But the problem is, you've got to be aware of these things. Okay? In a word, we must be aware of what we call parallels made plausible by selective description. This guy, Metzer, says. The Swedish scholar and Professor T.N.D. Mettinger originally set out to show that there were anywhere from 3 to 5 dying, rising God stories. And this guy, he gets all this information about Jesus just being like all these different myths. So he says, well, that sounds interesting. I'll go along with that. So what he does, he thinks, well, I'll fix about 5 of them, and he thinks, I'll really have a look and try and compare and just see what all this stuff's all about. So if Jesus is going to be like one of these, I'm going to be able to find it. So that's what he did. He went down and looked at all these God stories that were supposed to predate Jesus. And after looking at all the accounts critically, he reversed his opinion. He was looking for, I believe this. I believe Jesus just copied these other ones. And so he was like to prove what he believes. But in the proving of what he believes, he found the evidence wasn't there. And the opposite happened. His conclusion is, there is, as far as I am aware, absolutely no prima facie, that's a special kind of evidence, that the death and resurrection of Jesus is a mythological construct, drawing on the myths and rites of the dying and rising gods of the surrounding world. He says, what happened to Jesus is just not in these stories. There's no parallel. Don't worry about it. He says the death and resurrection of Jesus retains its unique character in the history of religions. So you can trust what they've said about Jesus. He's not what they've said about all this other stuff. Dump all that, you've got the right one here. And he moved from a position of being, if you like, almost anti-Jesus. The evidence was so strong, he came round to being for Jesus. Now that's happened time after time in history. And loads of people have done that, where they've gone out to prove the Bible wrong. They've gone out to prove Jesus wrong. They've gone out to prove there's no God. And in the process of amassing the evidence against all these things, they've ended up becoming believers. Which is good news for us. Okay? Because the evidence is there. This guy, this is interesting, he said, Jesus, certainly existed. As virtually every competent scholar of antiquity, Christian or non-Christian, agrees. Okay? This guy's saying, people who say to you that Jesus is not a historical character, he says they're nuts, because he is. All the evidence points to the fact he is. But notice the kind of scholar he is. Agnostic. He doesn't know. He's not a believer. He's in that position where I don't know whether I do believe something, I don't know whether I don't believe it. I haven't got enough evidence to convince myself to become down inside a believer or an unbeliever. But he says, looking at all the evidence, he says, nobody can say Jesus didn't exist. Or if they do say he didn't exist, they're not looking at the facts. Okay? So here's a person who technically is an unbeliever, as far as we're concerned. He's an unbeliever. But he's honest. Because he says, everybody, when you really look at the evidence, it shows that Jesus was a historical character. Okay? Now, that's not to say that you come to the conclusion that Jesus is the Son of God. That's a bit further down the line. In very fact, nobody, he would say, you're crazy if you say Jesus didn't exist. That's a stupid argument. But then again, people are willing to use that argument. Independent testimonies, documents that comprise the New Testament, ancient documents outside the New Testament, they all are sources that we can look at and depend on. We talk in all sorts of situations. We talk about Alexander the Great. We talk about Pilate, Herod. We talk about Julius Caesar. All these people we talk about in history as historical people. We talk about some of the philosophers, Aristotle, Plato, and all these kind of people. And yet the evidence we have that they actually existed is based on a few documents, a handful of documents, compared with the evidence that's there for Jesus. There's thousands of documents there for Jesus. And Plato, the first history we have of Plato and his writings, a Greek philosopher, was written, we've got in the libraries in the British Museum, is 800 years after Plato existed. That's the earliest document information we have that Plato ever existed. In Jesus, we've got stuff in Bodleian Library and some Radlin's Library and some of these others that date from 1975 of the year 75, the year 96, the year, I think another one's about 80 something. Jesus died at 30, 80, 30, 33, 34. Within 40 years, we've got fragments of documents from his time, and then we've got from there thousands of documents. We've got people who lived and eyewitnesses of the time, who then have other people that they've taught, and they're still around, and they are eyewitnesses of the eyewitnesses, and have listened to the eyewitnesses. We've got all their evidence, thousands of documents. And yet a lot of other stuff in history, we've got very little things. There was a great Roman, it wasn't Herodias, a great Roman historian. He wrote something like 46 volumes. And out of those 46 volumes about the history of the Roman Empire, there's only about 6 left. The rest are all gone. We know he wrote them, but we don't know where the rest are. The only ones that are still in existence are those 6. So it's amazing the amount of information we have of the historical Jesus. Now, we sometimes, in our discussions, I wouldn't say, I almost in arguments, but we don't argue with people, we discuss with people. In our discussion about people with Jesus, we might say, well, Jesus died on the cross. And they say, well, how do you know? And we say, well, the Bible says. And, well, how do you know the Bible's right? And they don't believe the Bible. So we're asking them to believe something because a book that they don't believe in talks about it. And that's a real problem for a lot of people. If you argue from the Bible and they don't believe in the Bible, then whatever your argument is going to be weak as far as they're concerned, because they don't believe in the Bible. I mean, there's even religious people who don't believe in the Bible, so, I mean, it's a problem, okay? There's people who say, well, in this day and age, there's loads of people who say, well, I believe there's something up there. I believe in God up there, but I don't want this religion business. I don't want a church, I don't want the Bible, I don't want all that stuff. I'm happy enough with God, okay? Forget the rest, okay? And you say to them, well, what kind of God do you believe in? And say, well, God of love. He's a God of love. And you say, a God of love? Where do you get that from? How do you know? Well, John 3:16 in the Bible says he's a God of love. But you don't believe in the Bible. You can't use the Bible to, prove something. We don't believe in the Bible in the first place. It just makes sense. But the thing is, without the Bible, you don't know God's a God of love. You need the Bible to know who God is. You need the Bible to know who Jesus is. But it's an awkward, it's a difficult argument and discussion to have if you're trying to convince people who Jesus is and you use the Bible to do that. The first thing you've got to do is convince them that the actual Bible is from God. And then you can make progress into, well, if it is from God, can we believe it? Can we trust it? And then if we can, then we can see who talks about it. Talks about God, talks about Jesus and all this other stuff. So there's a sense in which we've got to convince people that the Bible's true before we can talk about whether Jesus is true or not. Okay? So it's what they call secular logic, to try and convince somebody from something that they don't believe in about something that they don't believe in. So you can't talk to them about Jesus and use the Bible, so it's difficult. You've got to get to the point where there is a God. God has spoken. How's He spoken? Through the Bible. Okay, can we trust it? Okay, then we can move on. What does the Bible say about Jesus? And that's a part of the deal.
But to me, this is why it's important to me, if a Christian, if we have opportunity to read other books,
yes,
to read it, find out what they said about God and the Christ.
Yes.
Because most of the Christians, some of us, we only read only Bible. But if you read Quran, you will find out that Quran have a testimony concerning Jesus. If you read Bahar, you see that he have also a testimony concerning Jesus. So if you can read those things, you can use those things to teach those people as well. That's not true. Only the Bible. That's
true. Matter of fact, quite recently, there was a Muslim, what do you call, one of the clerics, one of the Muslim teachers, and he was talking to some religious person, Christian religion, and the guy said, why do you not believe in Jesus as the Son of God? And he said, well, can I believe in Muhammad? He says, but surely the Quran talks a lot more about Jesus than it does about Muhammad. And the guy thought, no, it doesn't. He said, just have a look for yourself. And this guy, Muslim guy, went off and he started to read his Quran, and he realized that there's 90% more about Jesus in the Quran than there is about Muhammad in the Quran. And he taught himself out of Muslim faith. Because he said, we've got it wrong. It's Jesus being highlighted, even by Muhammad's writing, is Jesus is the one we should be following. And obviously the Quran denigrates Jesus to only a prophet. It doesn't see him as the Son of God. But having said that, the guy had enough, if you like, honesty to look at the facts and even what the Quran was saying. The Quran is pointing to Jesus, not to Muhammad. And he talked himself out of Muslim faith. So that's true. I mean, when I was growing up, I became a Christian when I was about 19. and I was an argumentative Christian. I wasn't the nicest. Anyway, I was an ardent atheist before I became a Christian, an evolutionist. And I used to read, I used to be a crane, for 10 years I was a crane driver in the steelworks. And what you do when you're driving the cranes, I was on the middle crane, there was 4 cranes this bay, and I had to do the least work while the bay was running. If the bay stopped running, they all stopped because everything was feeding them, and I had to change the roles and stuff like that. But it meant, it was a particular job I had to do. This is hard work I did. 5 minutes out of every half hour, I had to take a coil off the rails, and a bit was cut off it and tested and went into the sampling just to make sure it was running properly, and then I put it back on. And it took me, because we had it down to fine art, it took me 5 minutes. That meant I was 25 minutes up in the crane reading. And so Von Daniken was popular at that time. He was the God is an astronaut, and he wrote loads of books. I read them all because the other people in the mill who didn't believe in God were reading them. And so, as you say, because you knew where they were coming from, you knew the arguments they were going to bring up, it was easy to talk to them. It was easy to show them Von Daniken doesn't know everything. Anyway, but that's true. So it's important for us to know a lot more, wind the reading. When historians examine the New Testament for historical validity, they're not looking at it as a holy book. They're treating it as a collection of ancient documents, just like so many other works of antiquity. Alright, so the Bible has actually been under more scrutiny than any other book in the world, really. For centuries, people have been trying to take it apart. The old one, we've got, the Hittite nation, it talks about back in Genesis. The Hittite nation, up until about 1910, nobody knew anything about it. It was only mentioned in the Bible. And all those people who wanted to knock the Bible used to say, hey, a Bible mistake, the Hittite nation, that's imagination. There's no such thing. There's no such nation ever as a Hittite nation. And then in 1910, archaeologists dug it up. And if you go down to the British Museum now, there's a huge room dedicated to the Hittites. And they were a huge nation. The Bible knew it first. And these guys ridiculed the Bible because the Bible talked about the Hittites. And that's happened down the centuries. That's a Bible mistake. That's a Bible mistake. I wish once they realised it wasn't a Bible mistake, they would actually say, okay, fair enough, we need to believe in the Bible. And if you knock one down, they'll look for another one. Oh, another one over here then. Okay, if that one's no good, we'll try this one. It's another mistake. And archaeology, time after time, was digging stuff up and showing that the people the Bible talked about existed. The cultures that the Bible talked about existed. What they did as a nations existed. And the Bible was proved right time after time after time. And that for the last 2,000 years, people said, I don't want to believe in God. But the Bible, goodness gracious me, just can't away from it. The Bible, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, you weren't a gentleman in this country. I know there was a few of them, okay, they weren't gentlemen. But you weren't a gentleman in this country unless you read the Bible. You wouldn't go to university 150 years ago and be considered a scholar if you hadn't read the Bible. The Bible was a part and parcel of our nation. And when before my time, 150 years, 60 years before my time, any member of the church, they used to be known as the people of the book. They knew the Bible. I wish I could say the same today. I've forgotten more of it than these guys used to know. But we were known as people of the book because we knew the Bible. You could trust it. And that was just the case. So anyway, historians, the average historian isn't looking at it as a holy book. They're looking at it as here's something been dug up here, that's interesting. There's something dug up here, that's interesting. The book of Isaiah, there used to be lots of arguments saying that the book of Isaiah was written 200 years after Christ. That's 200 years into the New Testament again. Until they dug up the Dead Sea Scrolls, which was 100 years before Christ, basically, a 100-year time before Christ. They dug them out of the caves, and when they unrolled them and got them, under microscope and did them all out, they found the book of Isaiah. And the only difference between the book of Isaiah was buried 100 years before Christ, it'd be like 300 years before they said it was even written, the enemies of the Bible. The one they dug up was about 4 words, major words, difference in the text. And that was because language changes. Like we've got the word gay today. That used to mean happy. And that means maybe happier, I don't know. But the word changes meaning, okay? And that was the only thing. So here's a book buried 100 years before Christ that they said wasn't written until 200 years after Christ, and it was almost identical to the Bible we have in our hands today. That is a testimony of the text. We can trust the text because that's been buried for 2,000 years, and it's saying, I'm just the same. It's what you've got in your Bible today. So, though people have tried to destroy it, it doesn't destroy that easy if you know what to look and what you're looking for.
Did they not at one time, was it not, try and burn all the Bibles?
That's happened a few times in history. I mean, it's happened regularly. Go way back, the 3rd century, Diocletian, before the 3rd century, Diocletian put out a decree, any Bible had to be burnt, to be found burnt, any having a Bible had to be put to death. That's the 3rd century, before the 3rd century. When Constantine came along, Constantine was his missus was a Christian. And he said, he was the emperor at the time, he said, it's a new ball game. I'm in charge now. He says, I want a Bible. Can anybody get me a Bible? Within less than a month, he had 50 Bibles in his hand. Because they hadn't all been burnt. They hadn't all been destroyed. People had been hiding them. And slowly they came back out of hiding and he promoted them again. But in use, as you said, the change from Protestantism to Catholicism to Protestantism, because of the structure of the Roman Catholic Church doesn't be found in the Bible. There was, every time a Roman Catholic not Prime Minister, ruler came on board, King, Queen came on board, they would discourage, and even to the same point where you could be put to death if you found hold of the Bible. When the Reformation took place and the printing press was first put forward, Miles Coverdale and his mates, his challenge was, he said, I'm going to put a Bible into the hands of every ploughboy in Britain. He says, I want people to read for themselves, to look for themselves, to examine for themselves. Because up to that point, before printing, it was in the hands of the elite. You had to depend on the elite telling you what to believe and why you believed it. You couldn't just read the Bible for yourself. And he said, I'm going to change all that. I'm going to put a Bible into every plough hand's hand so he can read it himself and see if what people are saying is true. And the Bereans in the book of Acts, that was one of the things that commended them. Paul says, I commend these Bereans because they didn't take what we said for granted. They searched the scriptures daily to see if what we said was true. He says, that's magic, that's the way it should be. Not me giving you a faith, but you developing your own faith and challenging me, because I don't know everything right. I've changed some of my thinking through the years as the more you study. And so therefore you challenge each other, and you help each other and encourage each other to get to know your Bible for yourself. And therefore you develop, the writer says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. It's a heavy duty stuff, he says, but it's worth it in the end because it's your faith. It's not a second-hand faith. It's not, well, I'll do this because my granny was religious. It's nothing to do with that. It's your faith, your understanding of Christ. And I've got my time clock's run out, so I need to stop. Okay? Alright, so keep that in mind. We're going to deal with some more of the negatives and see some of the positives that offset the negatives. But at the end of the day, hopefully we're going to see we can believe in Jesus because we can trust what the Bible says about Jesus. Jesus wasn't just a myth. He was a real person. And he was a real person and went on a cross and died in our place to give us the opportunity to have forgiveness of our sins. So I appreciate that. Paddy, would you like to lead us in a word of prayer, young man?
Thank you, Mike, for